The gallery was pristine, its walls adorned with the finest art the world had ever seen. Tall, sleek, and modern, the space was a temple for the elite, those who could afford the million-dollar masterpieces that adorned its walls. The owner, Ivan Sinclair, stood at the front, his arms crossed as he surveyed the latest exhibition. A self-made millionaire, he had cultivated a reputation as the gatekeeper of high society's artistic tastes. His opinions were always final, and to disagree with him was to risk being considered irrelevant. "These pieces," Ivan said, gesturing dismissively toward the paintings on display, "are the future of the art world. Timeless. Revolutionary. Just look at the brushstrokes. The raw emotion." He paused for dramatic effect, as if expecting the small crowd of collectors to hang on his every word. They did. Ivan was used to the attention. He was the man who decided which artists would rise to fame and which would be forgotten. It wasn't just money that spoke for him, it was influence. His opinion shaped trends. His galleries were the incubators of the next generation of art stars. At least, that's what he believed. As Ivan continued his monologue, a young man entered the gallery. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a worn leather jacket, and a white shirt. His skin was a deep shade of brown, and his eyes, sharp and focused, seemed to miss nothing. He was in his mid-20s, but there was a quiet confidence about him that made him seem older, wiser, almost timeless. His name was Malik Johnson, a local artist who had come to see if his submission to Ivan's gallery had been accepted. Malik had heard about Ivan Sinclair before, how the man could make or break an artist's career with a single glance. He knew that getting into Ivan's gallery was like earning a ticket into the high society of the art world. It would change his life. He didn't expect Ivan to recognize him immediately, but Malik was determined to make a statement with his work. He walked past a few of the paintings, silently admiring the skill of the artists. The large, abstract canvases with wild streaks of color and jagged, geometric shapes spoke to him on a deep level. His own art was more grounded, more personal. But there was room for both, he believed. Art wasn't about fitting into a specific mold, it was about expression. And Malik expressed everything he felt through his paintbrush. As Malik approached the reception area, Ivan caught sight of him from across the room. His lips curled slightly, the way they always did when he saw someone who didn't belong in his space. "And who do we have here?" Ivan murmured, his voice smooth and laced with condescension. "A young man with a dream, no doubt." He made his way toward Malik, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The other gallery-goers watched with interest. Malik stood tall, meeting Ivan's gaze without flinching. He had done his research, he knew who Ivan Sinclair was. The man who had turned art into a commodity, into something that could be bought and sold like stocks or bonds. But Malik didn't care about that. His work was his voice, and no one could silence it. "I'm here to submit my pieces for your consideration," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. Ivan raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a thin smile. "Ah, I see. And what exactly is it that you're offering, young man?" he asked, as if speaking to a child who had shown him a finger painting. Malik paused, but only for a second. He wasn't here to play games. "I've got a few pieces I think might be a good fit for your gallery." "Fit?" Ivan repeated with a laugh. "I'm afraid our tastes here are a bit more refined than whatever it is you're trying to sell." He gestured to the walls around them. "These are works of genius, created by artists who understand the true nature of beauty. You, my friend," Ivan's voice dropped with a hint of mockery, "are a hobbyist at best." Malik's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. He had been underestimated his whole life, first for his skin color, then for his humble beginnings. But he had come a long way. What Ivan didn't know was that Malik wasn't some upstart who needed approval to feel validated. His paintings told stories, spoke truths that people would eventually come to understand. "I think you're wrong," Malik said, his voice unwavering. "Art isn't about the price tag, or the reputation of the gallery owner. It's about what the work means. What it says to people. To the world." Ivan chuckled. Ah, yes. The idealism of youth. Look around you. Art is a market, and in the market, I'm the one who decides what's valuable and what's not. You may think your work is special, but trust me, it's not. The crowd around them murmured in agreement. Several nodded knowingly, as though they had heard this same speech 1,000 times. Malik felt his chest tighten, but he refused to back down. This was just another test, another challenge that he would rise above. Let me show you something, Ivan continued, his smile growing wider. He turned to a nearby assistant and waved for the man to bring over one of Malik's pieces that had been submitted earlier. The assistant brought over a painting, an abstract piece, full of colors that seemed to clash with each other. It was bold and chaotic, with vivid reds and purples that seemed to scream at the viewer. Ivan looked at the piece, then at Malik, and laughed. This looks like something a child could have done. A bit of color splashed onto a canvas with no rhyme or reason. You call this art? He turned to the crowd, shaking his head in mock disbelief. I'm sorry, but I have a reputation to uphold. If I put this on display, I'll be laughed out of the business. Malik's heart raced, but he remained composed. He knew what this moment was, an opportunity. The gallery owner had no idea who he was dealing with. He didn't know that the work he was mocking was going to change everything. But Malik wasn't going to let Ivan have the last word. You're entitled to your opinion, he said coolly. But I know my art will speak for itself. One day, people will see it for what it truly is. Ivan raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm sure they will, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Perhaps in a few years, after you've managed to scrape together a few dollars for more paint. With that, Malik turned and walked out of the gallery, his head held high. As the door closed behind him, he heard the soft murmur of laughter from Ivan and the others. But he didn't let it faze him. He knew what he had in his heart. And one day, the world would know, too. As Malik walked out of Ivan Sinclair's gallery, he kept his composure, but inside, his mind raced. The sting of the gallery owner's dismissal still burned, but he had learned long ago to hide his frustration. His art, his true expression, wasn't for those who couldn't see beyond their own biases. He knew that, deep down, Ivan's mockery was a reflection of his own insecurities, not Malik's lack of talent. But what Ivan didn't know, and Malik intended to keep it that way, was that his paintings weren't just some whimsical creation. They had a secret, a hidden depth that only a select few had recognized. Malik wasn't just an up-and-coming artist, he was a man who had already captured the attention of art critics and collectors around the world. The paintings that Ivan had dismissed were already valued at millions, but Malik kept his true worth hidden. His strategy wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about timing. For now, Malik played the part of the humble artist, someone whose work was overlooked and undervalued. His decision to submit to Ivan's gallery was part of a calculated move. He wanted to see if the owner's arrogance would blind him to the potential in front of him, and if it did, he'd be ready. But there was no rush. Malik wasn't just after validation from the art world's elite, he wanted control, and he was willing to bide his time until the right moment arrived. The truth was, Malik had spent years developing his craft in private, away from the glare of galleries and critics. His studio, tucked away in a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of the city, was a sanctuary. It was there that he painted his masterpieces, each piece a vivid explosion of emotion, a cry for justice, a reflection of the world he saw and the world he dreamed of. His work wasn't just beautiful, it was a statement. The colors he used were deliberate, the brushstrokes carefully chosen to evoke a particular feeling, to stir the soul. But it was more than technique, it was about the message he conveyed. The art spoke of the Black experience, of struggle, hope, and ultimately, triumph. The gallery world, however, wasn't ready for that kind of statement. It was a world of exclusivity, of narrow tastes, and even narrower opportunities. For an artist like Malik, it meant not just creating art but understanding the politics that governed the industry. He wasn't some naive dreamer who thought his work alone would make him famous. He had learned the hard way that even the best art could be ignored or dismissed if you didn't play the game. Malik's rise in the art world began long before Ivan Sinclair ever laid eyes on him. He had started small, attending local art fairs, working with smaller galleries that understood his vision. He had slowly built a reputation, one piece at a time. His work resonated with those who could see beyond the surface, people who recognized the raw power in his brushstrokes. But it was the secret auctions, the underground world of art collectors, that had truly catapulted him into a different league. Malik's paintings had started circulating in these secretive circles years ago. He had a few trusted allies, other artists, collectors, and curators, who recognized his genius long before the mainstream world did. They whispered his name in hushed tones at auctions, slipping his paintings into private collections, where their true worth could be appreciated without the prying eyes of the media or the art establishment. It wasn't that Malik wanted to hide his work, it was that he wanted to make sure the right people saw it first. People who understood the significance of his art and were willing to invest in it for the long haul. People who weren't blinded by the superficial judgments of galleries like Ivan's. And so, for years, he had allowed the art world to overlook him. He stayed out of the limelight, content with his quiet success. But now, things were changing. Malik had his sights set on something bigger. The day would come when he would reveal his true worth, and it would send shockwaves through the art world. And when that day came, Ivan Sinclair would be left scrambling, wondering how he had missed the chance to be part of something truly revolutionary. In the meantime, Malik continued to work in his studio, honing his craft. His next collection was already in the works, an ambitious series of paintings that would take the world by storm. He could feel the power of the brushstrokes as he painted, each stroke bringing him closer to his goal. These pieces were different from anything he had done before. They were not just about the black experience, they were about the universal human experience, about the struggles and triumphs that transcended race, culture, and background. Malik's vision was larger than just himself, it was a message to the world, a challenge to the art world to open its eyes and recognize what truly mattered. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen, seeing a message from an anonymous collector. It was simple, but the implications were clear. "We're ready. The time is now." The time was indeed now. Malik had known it for some time, but now it was official. His paintings would be on display in an exclusive auction that would attract the wealthiest, most influential buyers in the world. The price tags on his work would be astronomical, and he would be at the center of it all. It was the perfect moment to make his move. But Malik wasn't just after the money. This auction was more than just a financial opportunity, it was his chance to shift the balance of power in the art world. He had watched for years as the same names dominated the galleries, the same old guard of wealthy patrons and powerful collectors. It was time for that to change. As he stood in his studio, looking over his work, Malik smiled to himself. He had learned from the best, studying the tactics of artists who had gone before him, those who had used their art to change the world. He wasn't going to just sell paintings. He was going to use his art to reshape the very fabric of the industry. But first, he had to deal with Ivan Sinclair. The gallery owner's dismissal of Malik's work would prove to be his downfall. Malik would rise above, and Ivan, along with the other gatekeepers of the art world, would soon realize that they had underestimated him. And when the day came, when his work finally achieved the recognition it deserved, the world would know one thing: Malik Johnson had always been more than just a painter. He had been a visionary, a man whose art spoke not just to the world of galleries and collectors, but to the very soul of humanity. Malik's path to the art world had not been easy. He hadn't been born into privilege or wealth, his family was working class, just like so many others in his neighborhood. His mother, a seamstress, and his father, a mechanic, had taught him the value of hard work and the importance of perseverance. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that bond was what had shaped Malik into the man he had become. His love for art had started at a young age, not with fancy paints or brushes, but with the materials he could get his hands on. As a child, he had used scraps of cardboard, old newspapers, and pencils that barely had any lead left. He would draw for hours, imagining worlds where his family didn't struggle, where people of color were not invisible in the media, where the very idea of struggle itself was nothing but a distant memory. But as much as he loved art, it never seemed like a realistic path for someone like him. He had always been told that art was for the rich, for those who had connections, for those who could afford the luxury of creating without worrying about the daily grind of life. His teachers in school didn't understand his desire to draw. They saw it as a distraction, as something that would take him away from the practical subjects, math, science, and language arts. Even his friends, those who shared his struggles, would laugh at his dreams of becoming an artist. "That's for rich kids," they'd say. "You need to focus on a real job." But Malik had never wavered in his belief that his art was important, that his voice could be heard through the strokes of a paintbrush. He simply had to find a way to make others listen. After high school, Malik enrolled in a community college with the intent of pursuing a degree in art. He didn't have much, just a few scholarships, a part-time job, and a burning desire to prove that he could make it. The other students in his classes were often from wealthy backgrounds, with fancy brushes and expensive canvases, while Malik worked with whatever he could afford. His materials were humble, but his ideas were anything but. His professors recognized his raw talent early on. Though his technique wasn't as polished as some of the other students, there was something about his work that caught their attention, a certain honesty, a certain depth that was often missing from more conventional pieces. Malik's paintings were unapologetic. They were bold, direct, and brimming with emotion. Each piece told a story, and it was clear that Malik's story was one that had yet to be told on a grand scale. His work had heart, it was real, and that rawness was what made it stand out. But there were still challenges. Malik's professors encouraged him to apply for exhibitions, but he found himself up against galleries that were inaccessible, places where the doors were open only to those with connections. His race, his background, even the way he dressed, everything seemed to work against him in the world of high-end art. He wasn't a part of the established networks. He didn't know anyone who could get him into those elite spaces. He was on his own, and that was how he had learned to operate. Despite the barriers, Malik continued to paint, slowly gaining recognition in smaller, local galleries. He didn't care about the prestige, he just wanted to create. His early exhibitions were modest affairs. Some were held in community centers or local cafes, where his work could be seen by a handful of art lovers, but for Malik, that was enough. Each piece sold was another step forward, another acknowledgement that his work was worthy. It didn't matter that the prices were modest, he wasn't looking for wealth, at least not yet. What mattered was the feeling he got when someone connected with his art. Through these small exhibitions, Malik built relationships with a handful of passionate collectors, many of whom were artists themselves. They understood what he was doing, they appreciated the message in his work, and most importantly, they saw the potential in him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. It was a reminder that, even in a world that often ignored or undervalued artists like him, there were people who recognized talent when they saw it. But Malik knew he couldn't stay small forever. The art world, at least the one that mattered, was built on exposure, on recognition, on a powerful network of galleries, collectors, and critics who decided who would rise and who would fall. He knew the rules, and he knew that to truly change the game, he would have to be a part of it. And that meant breaking into the established art world. That meant getting his work into places like Ivan Sinclair's gallery. It didn't matter how condescending or dismissive the owner had been. That was just part of the game. While Malik continued his quiet rise in the local art scene, he began to make moves behind the scenes. He had learned that success in the art world wasn't just about creating beautiful pieces, it was about understanding the business, knowing when to speak up, and when to stay silent. Networking was key, and though it wasn't something he had been taught, it was a skill he honed over time. He made it a point to visit smaller galleries, attending openings, and talking to other artists, critics, and collectors. He introduced himself as Malik Johnson, an up-and-coming artist, though he knew in his heart that he was more than that. Over time, people began to take notice. Small-time collectors were drawn to his work. Some took a chance and bought a piece or two, while others invited him to showcase in their spaces. Malik wasn't making millions, but he was building momentum. Each sale, each invitation, each person who saw value in his work was a sign that his time was coming. But all of it had been preparation. The real plan was yet to unfold. Malik knew that there were bigger fish in the art world, fish that swam in the waters of the elite galleries, the high society auctions, and the billionaires who saw art as a symbol of status. And that's where he was headed, toward the day when his name would be in those same circles. As he walked into his modest studio one evening, after another day spent working on his latest collection, Malik looked at the paintings in front of him with a sense of satisfaction. They weren't perfect, but they were his. They told his story. They were a reflection of his identity, his struggles, and his dreams. And when the world finally saw them, they would know the truth: what had started as humble beginnings would become a revolution. He sat down, picked up his brush, and began to work again, quietly confident that the world was about to change, and that his place in it was already secured. It was just a matter of time. The days following his meeting with Ivan Sinclair were quiet, almost eerily so. Malik threw himself into his work, channeling the frustration and anger he felt into the brushstrokes. The paintings in front of him, vibrant and full of emotion, were a form of therapy. Each canvas was a conversation with the world, a world that often dismissed him, undervalued his worth, and underestimated his potential. But Malik knew better. He had never been one to react impulsively. No, he had learned the art of patience, the kind of patience that would turn his quiet moments of frustration into explosive success when the time was right. Still, even as he worked, the sting of Ivan's mocking words remained fresh. A cute pup. The dismissiveness was almost too much to bear. But Malik refused to let that moment define him. Instead, he used it as fuel for his next move. He could almost hear Ivan's voice ringing in his ears every time he picked up the paintbrush. The thought that someone like Ivan could belittle him, belittle his work, his passion, was a challenge he was more than willing to accept. As days turned to weeks, Malik kept his head down and focused on his art. But he didn't do it alone. He had allies, people who understood what it took to survive in the art world. One of them was Olivia Granger, an influential art collector who had been quietly following Malik's work for some time. Olivia had first come across one of Malik's paintings in a small, local exhibition, and she had been captivated. It was unlike anything she had seen before, a bold piece that spoke to the soul, a reflection of the artist's experiences, struggles, and hopes. Though Olivia operated in the higher echelons of the art world, she was a rarity, someone who recognized the power of authenticity over prestige. She didn't care about the trends or the politics. She cared about the art itself, and Malik's work had intrigued her from the start. She had been in touch with him through private messages, offering encouragement and discussing the deeper meanings behind his pieces. But she hadn't yet made her move. That was about to change. One evening, as Malik was cleaning his brushes after a long day of work, his phone buzzed. The message came through from an unknown number, but the name at the top was all too familiar. Olivia Granger. The message was simple, but to the point. Malik, I think it's time. The auction is ready. His heart skipped a beat. Malik had been waiting for this moment for years, but he had never expected it to come like this. Olivia was a key player in the world of high-end art auctions, and her endorsement could change everything. If she was ready to take his work to a prestigious auction, it meant that Malik's paintings were finally about to be recognized on a global scale. But the stakes were high. Olivia had warned Malik about the risks of entering the exclusive art circles. The auction world was cutthroat. There were powerful collectors, wealthy investors, and ruthless critics who would stop at nothing to control the art market. It wasn't just about selling a piece, it was about positioning yourself within the ecosystem of elite art collectors, galleries, and curators. One wrong move, one misstep, and your name could fade into obscurity. Malik had known these risks all along. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. But the real question was whether he was ready to stake everything on the chance to break into this new world. He sat down at his desk, his mind racing as he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. His humble beginnings, the years of struggle and rejection, the moments of doubt, all of it had led him here. This was the turning point. If he played his cards right, he could finally prove to the world that his art was more than just a message, it was a revolution. And Ivan Sinclair, along with every other gallery owner who had dismissed him, would have no choice but to acknowledge it. Malik didn't reply to Olivia's message right away. He needed to think. The decision wasn't just about fame or wealth, it was about using this platform to amplify his voice, his story, and the stories of those who had been ignored for too long. This was bigger than him. This was about changing the art world and, in doing so, changing the way society viewed Black artists. It was about breaking barriers and redefining what art could be. The next day, Malik met with Olivia at a small cafe, away from the prying eyes of the art world. She had a calm, collected demeanor, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts that raged inside Malik's mind. Olivia had seen artists rise and fall in the industry, but there was something about Malik's work that resonated with her on a deeper level. She could see the fire in his eyes, the quiet confidence that hinted at greatness. "I've been following your work for some time now, Malik," Olivia began, her voice low but steady. "I think you're ready for something bigger. The auction house is prepared to present your collection to a select group of elite collectors. But before we move forward, I need to know you're ready. This isn't going to be easy. The art world can be harsh, and once your name is out there, there's no going back." Malik nodded. He had no illusions about what this meant. But he also knew that this was the only way to break through. He had spent years building a foundation of quiet success, but now it was time to go public, to rise to the top and demand recognition. "I'm ready," Malik said, his voice unwavering. "Let's do it." Olivia smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Good. Let's show them what they've been missing." The decision was made. Malik's work would be featured in a prestigious auction, one that would draw attention from collectors, critics, and buyers around the world. His art, once dismissed by people like Ivan Sinclair, was about to become the hottest commodity in the art world. Malik spent the next few weeks preparing for the auction, working tirelessly to finish his latest pieces and ensure that his collection was curated to perfection. But as the date of the auction drew closer, he couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching him, waiting for him to make his move. It wasn't just about the art anymore, it was about everything he had fought for, the recognition, the respect, and the chance to change the narrative. And then, on the night of the auction, as his paintings were unveiled to the room of elite buyers and critics, Malik's heart raced. The bidding war was fierce, the prices climbing higher with each passing moment. And in the front row, he saw a familiar face, Ivan Sinclair, who had once mocked his work, now sitting among the very people who had dismissed him. Ivan's eyes were wide with disbelief as he watched the price tags soar, each piece of Malik's art being sold for far more than he had ever imagined. Malik didn't smile. He didn't need to. The world was finally catching up to him. And when the gavel fell, signaling the final sale, Malik knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. The night of the auction had arrived, and the air in the grand hall was thick with anticipation. The prestigious event had been widely advertised, drawing collectors, critics, curators, and investors from all corners of the art world. For the first time, Malik was stepping into the realm he had longed for. It was a world of polished suits, sharp ties, and extravagant wealth. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had made it here, and his art was now on display for the world to see. Malik had walked into the building with Olivia Granger by his side, and as they passed through the doors, the silence of the gallery hall seemed almost deafening. The walls were lined with works by established artists, some long dead, others in their prime. But among the paintings that had been on display for decades, Malik's collection was a stark contrast. His work was bold, raw, and full of life, challenging the viewer to think, to feel, to understand the complexity of the world he had painted. Each piece carried the weight of his history, his struggles, his triumphs, and his unyielding determination to make his voice heard. Olivia, ever the professional, had been calm and confident. She had done her part, ensuring that Malik's work was presented in the best light possible. But even she had to admit, there was something about tonight that felt different. The buzz in the room, the murmurs of curiosity and admiration, told her that Malik's art was about to make waves in a way no one had anticipated. "I'm proud of you, Malik," Olivia said softly, as they made their way to the front of the gallery. "You've earned this moment." Malik nodded, his gaze fixed on the pieces that hung on the walls before him. The bid for the first piece was about to begin, and he felt a weight in his chest. He was used to the smaller, more intimate galleries, where the pressure wasn't as suffocating. But this? This was different. This was the big leagues. The audience was watching every move, every decision. The stakes were high, and the world was about to see whether his work was worth the hype. As the auctioneer called the room to order, the energy shifted. The spotlight now fell on the paintings of Malik Johnson. The first piece, titled Resilience of the Forgotten, was a striking portrayal of a young black woman standing tall against a backdrop of storm clouds, her expression one of strength and defiance. It was the kind of piece that made the viewer pause, made them think. The bidding started slowly, as the wealthy art collectors assessed its value, but as the price climbed higher, the room began to hum with excitement. Malik stood near the back of the room, his hands clasped together tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment he had worked for his entire life, the moment that would validate every sacrifice, every rejection, every hard day spent honing his craft. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall. "We have an opening bid of $100,000, he announced, and there was a slight murmur among the crowd. Malik's breath hitched. That was more than he had ever imagined. But it didn't stop there. The bids continued to rise, and with each new offer, Malik could feel the world shifting around him. It was no longer about how much his art was worth, it was about who recognized its value. The same critics who had dismissed him, the same galleries that had mocked him, now they were all in the room, competing for his work. $200,000. The auctioneer called out, and Malik's mind raced. He never expected his work to go this high. But there was something different about tonight. There was an energy in the room, a recognition that his art was not just a reflection of his experience, it was a symbol of something larger, something more profound. And then came the final bid, a voice from the front row, deep and confident. $500,000, the bidder announced, and Malik's heart nearly stopped. His piece, the one Ivan Sinclair had once laughed at, had just been sold for $500,000. The gavel fell, and the room erupted in applause. Malik stood frozen for a moment, not quite sure how to process what had just happened. He had heard stories of artists achieving astronomical sales at auctions, but this was real. This was his moment. The same gallery owner who had scorned him just a few weeks ago, Ivan Sinclair, was sitting at the front, his face flushed with disbelief. He had underestimated Malik. And now, his work had become the star of the auction, shattering expectations and shaking up the art world in ways no one could have predicted. Olivia smiled beside him, her eyes gleaming with pride. "See? I told you." But Malik's mind wasn't on the money. It wasn't on the recognition or the fame. It was on the realization that he had finally found his place in this world. This wasn't about getting rich, it was about being seen, being heard. He had created art that resonated with people. His voice, his experiences, his identity, those things mattered. As the night progressed, more of his pieces sold. One after another, his art shattered expectations, with collectors scrambling to secure a piece of his collection. The room buzzed with excitement, and Malik felt like he was watching from a distance, as if it were all a dream. But when it was over, when the final gavel fell and the room began to clear, Malik felt a quiet satisfaction wash over him. The world had seen his art for what it truly was. The respect he had been fighting for was finally here. In the midst of the crowd, Ivan Sinclair approached Malik. The once dismissive gallery owner now looked humbled, perhaps even a bit ashamed. "You were right," Ivan said, his voice low. "Your work. It's worth more than I ever gave it credit for." Malik studied Ivan for a moment, feeling a wave of satisfaction at the role reversal. He could have rubbed it in, could have reminded Ivan of his mocking words, but he didn't. He had already won. "Sometimes it takes the right people to see it," Malik replied, his voice calm. "I just needed someone to give me a chance." Ivan nodded and walked away, no longer the dismissive figure Malik had once feared. The world had spoken, and it was clear that Malik had a place in it now. Later that evening, as the last of the art collectors left the venue, Malik found himself alone, standing in front of the paintings that had once seemed like a distant dream. His mind was still reeling from the surreal events of the night, but deep down, he knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for recognition wasn't over, it was only just beginning. But Malik had proven that his art had value, that his voice had weight, and that he wasn't going to be ignored anymore. The journey was far from finished, but with every sale, every person who walked out of the auction hall talking about his work, Malik knew he was carving out his legacy. As he walked out of the gallery, he looked up at the starry sky above. The world was his canvas now. The days following the auction were a whirlwind for Malik. News outlets, blogs, and art critics flooded the media with praise for his work, discussing not only the shock value of his sales but the profound themes and emotional depth his pieces captured. For the first time, the art world was forced to reckon with Malik Johnson, and it wasn't just his talent that people were talking about, it was his story. Malik had become a symbol of perseverance, the artist who had risen from obscurity to take his rightful place among the greats. The auction had changed everything. His paintings, which had once been rejected by gallery owners who couldn't see their value, were now being showcased in major collections, bought by international collectors, and displayed in museums. It was as if the world had finally woken up to his artistry. But amid the excitement, Malik felt a strange unease settling within him. He had always been aware that success in the art world came with its own set of challenges. Fame, while coveted by many, also carried weight. The attention, the pressure, the expectations, it was a lot for anyone to handle, especially for someone who had spent so many years working in the shadows, away from the spotlight. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages, emails, and calls. There were interviews to be scheduled, gallery exhibitions to plan, and offers from art investors eager to work with him. It was overwhelming, to say the least. For years, Malik had operated on his own terms, creating art on his own time, away from the scrutiny of the public. But now, everything had changed. And the question that lingered in the back of his mind was simple: was he ready for this new life? Olivia had been a constant presence throughout the process, guiding him through the intricacies of the auction world and helping him navigate the complexities of fame. She'd told him that success in this arena wasn't just about the art, it was about the image, the brand, the story you told the world. She had warned him about the dangers of becoming a product, of losing the authenticity that had made his work so powerful in the first place. Malik didn't want to be consumed by the machine of the art world, but he knew that he had a unique opportunity to make a lasting impact, not just with his paintings, but with the narrative he created around them. One evening, as Malik sat in his studio, looking over the messages from collectors and curators, his phone rang. It was a private number, unfamiliar to him. Hesitantly, he answered, and a familiar voice greeted him on the other end. "Malik," Ivan Sinclair said, his tone unusually respectful. "I just wanted to reach out and congratulate you on your success. I think you've proven that you have what it takes to make it in this industry." Malik's mind flashed back to the day he had met Ivan in the gallery, to the moment when the man had dismissed his work as nothing more than a cute pup. The irony of Ivan's call wasn't lost on him. After all, the same man who had belittled him was now offering congratulations. "Thank you," Malik said, keeping his voice steady. "It means a lot." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Ivan continued, his voice carrying a hint of admiration. I've been following your work closely, Malik. Your pieces are stirring up conversations. And I think I may have misjudged you. I'd like to meet and discuss the possibility of a future collaboration. We could do something great together. Malik didn't know how to respond. On the one hand, he could see the potential in working with a figure like Ivan. He had the resources, the connections, and the credibility in the art world. But on the other hand, the memory of Ivan's condescending remarks still lingered, and Malik wasn't sure he could easily forget how the man had treated him. I'll think about it, Malik said cautiously, feeling the weight of the decision. As he hung up the phone, Malik sat in silence. The offer from Ivan was tempting, but it represented everything he had worked to break free from: the old guard, the people who had dismissed him and now wanted to profit from his success. He had worked so hard to get to this point, to carve out a space for himself where he could create art on his own terms. He wasn't sure he was ready to go back into the very world that had tried to hold him down. In the days that followed, Malik's thoughts were occupied with more than just art. He had gained fame, wealth, and recognition, but he hadn't anticipated how it would change his relationships with the people in his life. Old friends, new acquaintances, and even strangers who had heard of his success, began to approach him with their own expectations. Some wanted to collaborate with him, others wanted to capitalize on his newfound fame. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled in 100 different directions, and yet, he still found himself drawn back to his art, the one thing that had always been his true love. One afternoon, as Malik walked through his neighborhood, the streets that had once felt oppressive now seemed different. The graffiti-covered walls, the sound of distant conversations, and the energy of the people, it all felt like a reminder of who he was, where he had come from. He stopped in front of a small mural that had been painted by local artists, a vibrant, colorful piece that depicted a figure standing tall amidst chaos, surrounded by a swirl of colors. It reminded him of his own journey, the struggles, the doubts, the moments of weakness. But also, the strength to rise above it all. It was then that Malik realized something crucial. His success wasn't just about the paintings he sold, the accolades he received, or the money he made. It was about the impact his art had on the world, on the people who saw themselves in his work, who recognized their own struggles and triumphs in his images. He wasn't just creating for the collectors and the critics, he was creating for the people who needed to see his art, to understand that they weren't alone in their experiences. With that realization, Malik made a decision. He would continue to create on his own terms, no matter what. He wouldn't let anyone dictate the direction of his career or his art. He would stay true to his voice, to the stories that had shaped him, and to the people who had believed in him from the start. As for Ivan, Malik knew that he would have to make a choice. He could accept the offer and work with someone who had once scorned him, or he could continue to build his own path, free from the constraints of the traditional art world. Either way, Malik was no longer the man who had been rejected, he was the artist who had proven his worth. And no matter what came next, he would always remember the lesson that had brought him here: authenticity and resilience were more important than anything the art world could offer. As the months passed, Malik found himself standing at the crossroads of two very different worlds. The art world had embraced him in a way he hadn't expected. His paintings were not just sold at auctions, they were now being displayed in galleries, museums, and private collections around the world. Malik's name was becoming synonymous with a new wave of black artists redefining the landscape of contemporary art. Yet, even as his reputation grew, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his journey than the accolades and the offers that came with it. The pressure to keep up with expectations was overwhelming at times. The industry, with all its glamorous parties and high-profile buyers, felt increasingly foreign to him. Every day, he was reminded that the art world was a business, one driven by trends, investments, and public relations. Malik had seen the way some artists bent themselves to fit into that mold, sacrificing their authenticity for the promise of fame and wealth. He knew that wasn't the path he wanted to take. His art had always been about something deeper, about the pain, beauty, and truth of the world he had lived in, and he didn't want to lose sight of that. One chilly evening, after another round of media interviews and gallery visits, Malik sat alone in his studio, his hands hovering over a blank canvas. The familiar sense of excitement and possibility he once felt when creating was now tempered by a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. He had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of, and yet something felt incomplete. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Olivia Granger, his manager, and the woman who had believed in him from the start. They'd built their professional relationship on mutual trust and respect, and Malik knew that she had been by his side through the most challenging moments of his rise to success. "Malik, we need to talk," Olivia's voice sounded urgent on the other end. "There's something you need to see. It's important." Malik frowned but didn't hesitate. "What is it?" "Meet me at the gallery. I think you'll want to see this in person." Malik's mind raced. Was it another new offer? A potential collaboration? He had seen his fair share of art investors lately, all eager to get a piece of his growing success. But he didn't want to jump into anything without thinking it through. As he drove to the gallery, a feeling of unease settled in his stomach. There was something about the tone in Olivia's voice that suggested this meeting was different from the others. When he arrived, he found Olivia standing in front of a large canvas, her face solemn. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the gallery lights. "This," Olivia said, gesturing to the canvas in front of her, "is something I need you to see." The painting was unlike anything Malik had ever seen before. It was a distorted, surreal image, a blend of his own work with influences from other artists, including the very people who had once rejected him. The canvas depicted a scene of towering figures, faces twisted in grotesque expressions, and bright, chaotic splashes of color that seemed to overwhelm the viewer. It was dark, unsettling, and eerily familiar. "What is this?" Malik asked, stepping closer. His heart raced as he studied the details. "It's from one of your past exhibitions," Olivia said. "But it's not yours. Someone has copied your work. This painting is a direct imitation of your style." Malik's mind raced. He recognized the patterns in the brushstrokes, the way the colors bled into each other. It was unmistakably his, but this wasn't his creation. He could feel his anger rising. How could someone plagiarize his art? How could they steal the soul of what he had worked so hard to build? "This is insane," Malik muttered, staring at the piece. "Who would do this?" Olivia exhaled sharply. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. But there's more. The gallery owner who's been behind this piece, the one showcasing it as their own, he's been going around telling collectors that you're the one who copied them. He's trying to discredit your work." Malik's anger flared. The audacity of it was staggering. Someone had stolen his identity, his vision, and now they were trying to turn the narrative upside down. This wasn't just about art, it was about power, influence, and control. The very same forces that had tried to undermine him at the beginning of his journey were still at work, but this time, Malik wasn't going to let them get away with it. "We need to confront this," Malik said, his voice low but determined. "I'm not letting anyone take credit for what's mine. If they want to play dirty, then let's play the game on my terms." Olivia nodded. "I agree. But we have to be strategic. We can't just make a public spectacle out of it. We need to expose this person for who they really are." Over the next few days, Malik and Olivia put their plan into action. They tracked down the gallery owner responsible for the fraudulent work, a man named Harold Jensen, who had been involved in the art world for years but was known for taking shortcuts when it suited him. Jensen had a reputation for exploiting young artists, buying their work on the cheap and then reselling it at astronomical prices. He'd done this to Malik once before, dismissing his art as unworthy, but now he was using Malik's very style to line his pockets. Malik's first step was to reach out to the collectors who had purchased the stolen pieces. With Olivia's help, he gathered evidence, photos, emails, and even testimonies from those who had been privy to Jensen's shady dealings. The proof was undeniable. They weren't just going to expose Jensen's theft, they were going to take him down. The confrontation took place in a small, upscale office in the heart of the city. Jensen, as expected, was unapologetic at first, dismissing Malik's claims as the bitter ramblings of a young artist who couldn't handle the competition. But Malik was no longer the man he had been when he first walked into the gallery. He had grown, learned, and fought for his place in the art world. And this time, he was in control. "I've worked too hard to get where I am," Malik said, his voice calm but fierce. "This isn't just about my art. It's about respect, something you clearly don't understand." Jensen's smug expression faltered as Malik laid out the evidence. The room grew tense, and the power had shifted. What Jensen hadn't counted on was the strength of the community Malik had built. It wasn't just about the galleries and the collectors, it was about the people who believed in him, the ones who had followed his journey and supported him along the way. Within weeks, Jensen's reputation had crumbled. The fraudulent paintings were removed from galleries, and the collectors who had been misled were refunded. The truth had come to light, and Malik had once again proven that his voice would not be silenced. As the dust settled, Malik stood in his studio, looking at the empty canvas before him. The world had tried to break him, to steal from him, but he had fought back, not just for himself, but for every artist who had ever been dismissed, plagiarized, or overlooked. The phone rang again, but this time it was different. It wasn't an offer or a call for collaboration, it was a message from someone who had once been part of the same struggle, someone who had fought for their own space in the art world. The message read simply, "We're proud of you. You've shown us what it means to stand up for ourselves." Malik smiled, a quiet sense of peace settling in his chest. This was his moment, not just in the art world, but in life. He had overcome the obstacles, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger than before. His journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, he would define the future on his own terms.